With that, Stephanie, it's all yours. Here you go.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks everybody. I want to introduce our speaker for tonight. We have Janet Smith with her Sex in the Garden speech or presentation. So Janet is with the Dallas County Master Gardener, North Texas Master Naturalist, and Native Plant Society of Texas, correct? Okay, and on this presentation, the secrets of garden life and pollination are explained in this educational and entertaining photo-rich presentation. And trust me, guys, I've heard people talk about the last time you gave this, and this was brought back by popular demand. So this will give you a whole new perspective on what flowers do to lure insects and others to assure their future. So without further ado, Janet Smith.
Thank you. Okay, since I'm a master gardener and a master naturalist, I wonder, are there any that are both of those? Only one? Wow. In our chapters, we have a lot of people that took the master gardening class and are active in that group and then became active in the naturalists. But I don't know anybody that took the naturalists first and then the gardeners, because when we tell them the classes are all day long and they have to take tests, they kind of decide, oh, they don't really need that, which I totally understand. So, and some of you might know me if you've taken any of the Native Plant Society Native Landscape Certification classes that Dallas has offered. Collin County does them too, but not recently. And you might have seen me on the Zooms for that. And 2 people already recognized me from that, so. Okay, well, I'm a master naturalist and you know what our mission is. And so whenever I get the opportunity, I always like to point out what's really happening in our natural world so that people will have an appreciation for it and maybe some respect and more care about it than having their yards covered in grass. So just to clarify what I'm going to talk about, it's not this, but it's amazing how many people have come up to me and shown me their pictures like this and thinking I might want to use it in my talk. And I said, well, thank you. I'm glad you got to see that, but I already have my own picture. I'm not going to talk about this tonight, but I do talk a lot about butterflies and I talk a lot butterfly sex. And I'm sure not talking about this. But if something that you hear me say reminds you of this, remember that's in your mind. Because I'm talking about sex in our garden, and it's based on this book that I got at the Arboretum on their Valentine display in 2006 when I was a brand new master gardener. And I read it. I had avoided science my whole educational time. I mean, I'm an optimist, but I always left science till I was a senior because I didn't want to waste any time in a science class if I wasn't going to graduate. And so I took biology with all the people that had flunked it. And in college, I took geology when I was a senior because I didn't want to waste time if I didn't have to. But this book kind of was my introduction to how nature really works. And it was a fun book. And I started telling my friends about it. And one of them was the head of the Speakers Bureau. And she said, you need to do a talk on that. And I'm going to book you on it. So she booked me 9 months out and I had to get the talk together. But notice this book is by Angela Overy, who turned out, I contacted the publisher and she allowed me to call Angela Overy, who was this delightful British woman who lived in Colorado Springs. So I asked her if I could use this as the basis of a talk, and she said yes, but I couldn't use any of her photos. Well, at the time, I was an avid photographer, so that, great, I'll take my own photos. And then along came Photoshop, and people started asking, why'd you leave the dead leaf in your picture? And I said, because dead leaves happen. It's a part of nature. Yeah, but I don't want to see it in my picture. And I thought, okay, I'm done. And I haven't really done much photography since. So anyway, whoops. This is what we're going to talk about tonight. Can you in the back see it? Okay. And based on the native plant sales that I go to or supply plants for, I think that Planned Parenthood is still fully funded in Texas. So, most people enjoy looking at flowers, and they're pretty, and people like to stroll through flowers, but they really have no idea what's going on. The plants and the pollinators are having an orgy. So tonight, I'm going to teach you how to be a plant and pollinator voyeur. So flowers, they're beautiful, but the only reason plants produce them is so that they can create future generations of their own species. And every living thing wants to do that. It's just nature's way that living things want to reproduce. So the flowers are the mechanism for many of the plants to reproduce. As you know, not all plants reproduce with flowers, but we're going to talk about the ones that do. And since flowers can't get up and move around, they can blow in the wind, but they're stationary in the ground or their pot or wherever they are. They need sexual aids, and we call those pollinators. So there are over 200,000 species of animals that help plants reproduce. And yes, one of those species is humans. And in China, they have a lot of humans now who have to help plants reproduce because their air quality is so bad, and they've killed off so many insects, it doesn't happen naturally. So let's hope we don't have that happening here. So in a group of naturalists, I expect that I get a different reaction to this picture than I do in a group of gardeners who mostly don't think this is a real cute thing. And they don't really want to meet one. But among naturalists, I think you probably do and you appreciate them. But in case you like to drink one of these, you really must like this bat, because it is the exclusive pollinator of the agave plants that produce tequila. So bats are very important pollinators, especially in the tropics. And we have bats around here. I have to admit, I have never seen one up close in the wild. I've seen them at zoos and places like that, but not, I know they're there. I have to admit, I have never seen an owl in the wild. I know they're there. They're all around. People see them all the time. I have seen owls in their nests with their babies, but I've never seen one out flying. And I think I just don't know where to look, or I don't spend enough time in the wild areas after dark. So I probably should come to Sam's moth event this weekend. So just a quick review of the anatomy of a flower. The stamens are the male organs. The pistil is the females. And we've got petals and sepals. Tepals aren't on here, but that's another growth. Of course, so there's a lot of parts of flowers, but most flowers have their sexual organs fully visible, like these. This is an amaryllis on the left, and that's a hibiscus on the right. And both of them have their sex organs hanging out for the world to see. And remember I said I started doing this talk in 2007. And as time went by and there was a family of sisters and one brother that became very famous, mostly because they're letting it all hang out as much as possible and to be almost decent. And you know, that's the Kardashian family. So whenever I look at these flowers that have their sex organs on full display, I can't help it. They have infiltrated my mind. And I think, oh, that's another Kardashian flower. But they want to attract pollinators, so they've got to make their parts visible. So the stamen is male portions, and the anther is what creates the pollen. And this is a lily, and hopefully you can see here, this has got UT orange pollen, and the pollen's only ready to be distributed when the anther has gone kind of horizontal. When it's upright like this, if you tap that, you're not going to get any pollen to come out. But this one, I tapped the filament here, and some pollen fell out. Every species of plant has a different kind of pollen. And that pollen can only be used, from that species, can only be used by other flowers of that species. So you don't see sages being pollinated by pollen from lilies or anything. It's all species specific. And the pollen comes in every size, shape, color, consistency. They're all unique, but you need to have a microscope to tell. You know, with the naked eye, we could say, oh, that one's orange and this one's yellow. But aside from that, it's too small for us to make those distinctions. So the pistil is the stigma and the ovary, the female parts. And here at the top, whoopsie, I knew I was going to, shoot, sorry. I'm not used to this. Damn, whoops. Okay. I think I'm giving that up, and I'm going to use the little arrows. Oh yeah, I was trying to use the pointer. So here's the stigma up here at the top, and this is the ovary. And it's down at the bottom of the flower where it's protected by the petals, the sepals, the tepals, whatever that flower happens to have. So I had to take off petals in order to see the ovary. So the pollen lands here on the stigma, and the stigma can determine if that is from its same species of flower, and it can also determine if it's from its own plant or if it's from another plant. And it gives priority to pollen from another plant. Now, as you might know, many plants are self-pollinating, and those usually don't have big, flashy, significant flowers because they don't need to attract pollinators. They're just going to kind of fold up on themselves. And a lot of the grasses are self-pollinators, and we don't usually think of grasses as having flowers. And that's why they don't need flowers, because they're going to pollinate themselves. Plants that prefer to be cross-pollinated can pollinate themselves, but it's only at a last resort. So mating is synonymous with pollination, and it's taken place when the pollen has penetrated the stigma and it has started to germinate down in the ovary. And at that point, the flower has succeeded. So the flower usually wilts. And you might be familiar with deadheading. That's when you trim off, or I have the bad habit of trying to do it with my fingernail, which doesn't usually work. But if you snip off the flower, the plant will produce more buds, more flowers, because you've taken away its chance to reproduce. So there is a scientific reason why you want to deadhead if you want to keep flowers blooming longer. And those of us that love flowers want to give them the longest season we can, so we are out deadheading a lot. At that point, the flower has succeeded. The fertilized egg eventually becomes the seed. But to me, that was too scientific. You know, I'm not the scientist. So we're going to skip that and go on to what I think are more interesting aspects of pollination. This kind of sums it up. And you can see this is from 2008, and it was a cartoon in the Dallas Morning News. And I have had some friends who were retired. They were about 10 years older than me. And for some reason I never understood, they set their alarm and got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then they would complain if the newspaper hadn't been delivered. And they knew, don't call me before 9. So one morning at 9 o'clock, my phone rang. And it's my friend said, you've got to, have you seen the newspaper? Have you read the comics? There's one in here for your talk. And I would have seen it myself, but she alerted me to it, and I appreciated that. Oops. So sexual orientation. Remember, back in 2007, that was not a topic among most people. I mean, as I had on NPR coming out here, driving up from Dallas, you know, there's the stories about sexual orientation and sexual reassignment and things. When I started giving this talk, I said I thought plants had more options than humans. Well, you know, in the intervening years, now I think they're about the same. But but flowers are called perfect flowers if they have both the male and female sex organs. And here you can see, here's the female and here's the male, and this is a tulip. Some plants have flowers of different genders on the same plant. Sometimes the plant will be male or female. Sometimes they will start as one and change to the other. Sometimes they will let the conditions dictate which gender they will be for that season. And, you know, despite the last month or so, we're normally in a drought situation here in North Texas. And I think some of us, we don't want the drought back, but we'd really like a little relief from all this rain and let the water be absorbed. So the next rain will just be runoff. But which gender do you think a plant would choose to be in a year where the growing conditions are really harsh, like hot and dry? You got a 50-50 chance here. So let's hear some guesses. Okay, you think it would be female in a challenging year? Wrong. And this is, if you think back to what the fellow said about the dick sissles and what the male does and what the female does, you know that the male doesn't have as long-lasting and involved relationship with producing the next generation as the female does. So it takes less energy to create pollen than to create seeds. So in harsh conditions, some of these plants would choose to be male for that season. And pollen can last for years. So it can be there and be ready when they finally have good growing conditions, and that particular plant might then be a female. So I was giving this to the North Texas master naturalists. Way back, I became a naturalist in 2011, and this was before I joined that group. And this guy, you know, most people are dressed like y'all. And frankly, when I was a new master naturalist, one day we were going on a field trip as part of our training, and we were going to the Great Trinity Forest. And so I thought, oh, I'll wear one of my tree t-shirts. And it was all wrinkled, and I started ironing it. And then I thought, no, not for the naturalists, I don't have to iron it. If I wore this to a gardener's meeting, I would iron it. The gardeners have gotten a much more relaxed since then, so I probably wouldn't have to iron it anyway, which is good because I don't even know where I keep my iron anymore. But now I forget where I was going with that. Pardon? Oh yeah. So this guy in a three-piece suit comes up to me later and says, if I had given this talk in a corporate setting, I would have been sued for sexual harassment. And I said, what? I'm talking about plants and pollinators. He said, you called men lazy. And I did not know this man. And after that exchange, I didn't particularly want to know that man. But he appeared to be in his 40s, and I thought, I don't know how you got to be this old. I couldn't say this, of course. And you haven't figured out what your participation is in reproduction versus what the woman's is? I hope for the sake of womanhood, you're not married. You know? I hope for the sake of womanhood, you've had a vasectomy. But of course, I couldn't say that. So, among the plants that have male flowers and female flowers are squash. And squash, interestingly enough, do any of you grow squash? Yeah. They are pollinated before dawn by squash bees, which come out. Most bees don't come out before dawn, but squash bees do. So they get out there and they do their job. You might see bees on these flowers throughout the day, but those are not the ones that are pollinating them. Mountain cedar. The male is on the left, the female is on the right. The male, these plants can be wind pollinated as well as animal pollinated, and they can cause allergies, as we all know when we have mountain cedar fever every year. Water lilies. Does anybody grow water lilies? Yeah, well, water lilies are native around the world. They're on every continent except Antarctica, perhaps. And they're very common in the tropical areas, which are wetter areas, so there's more water for them to grow in. But they typically open the first day, they're female. Then they close up overnight and reopen as male. So you can see the flowers look different. It's sort of like the metamorphosis that a lot of insects, like butterflies and moths, go through. But beetles are one of the prime pollinators of water lilies. And it's not unusual for a beetle to risk its life by entering the female flower and being in there overnight. So it would have the first opportunity to get the pollen when the plant produces that for the next day. So very interesting how they know to do that. This is a Victoria water lily. And I live down in Dallas. I live very close to the Arboretum. And I used to go there a lot. And then when I learned more about native plants, I kind of thought, gee, they don't have any native plants here. And then when they talked about paving the prairie to build more parking lots, I ended up being one of the big protesters. And I dropped my membership after that. And now about the only time I go there is if I'm speaking, because then I get in for free, because I'm not about to give them 1 penny to grow all their exotic plants. But before, do y'all remember it was in 2011, I believe, or 12, when we did a big protest about paving the prairie. And it was when the Dale Chihuly glass exhibit was at the Arboretum. Well, the year before that, their big summer attraction was this lily. So things really improved with the Dale Chihuly. They got a lot more people for that than for this. But this water lily is from the Amazon, from the tropics. And it gets pollinated at night. And in order to attract the pollinators, it emits a scent, and then it can increase the ambient temperature by 10 degrees Fahrenheit in order to disseminate that aroma to attract the pollinators. And all I could think of, especially in the last month or so, when you might have noticed it's been a little humid. Did we all move to Houston? I can't imagine that I would want to be around one of these at night if it's going to make it even hotter. It's hot enough already. Tonight it's supposed to get down to 70. Hallelujah. But just another way, a plant knows that it has to attract pollinators in order to reproduce, and it does what it thinks is necessary. So composite flowers. There's so many composite flowers, and they're among the most popular. And one reason is they bloom for so long. And it's really because they're made of hundreds of small individual flowers. And composite flowers have 2 kinds of flowers. What we would call the petals are called ray flowers, and the things in the middle are disc flowers. Many times the ray flowers are sterile, and their only purpose is to make these disc flowers more noticeable to pollinators. So before I was into native plants, I had this daisy, Gerber daisy, that I had planted in a pot. And so it ended up being hip to waist high. And I live in what we now call a mid-century home. For those of you in Collin County, you probably think of those as historical homes. And somebody before me closed in the 1-car garage, which is now my media room that I used to call the den. Y'all remember that. And there's a 3-car garage in the back. So I have to go outside to get to the garage. And I planted the container of these right next to the walk-through door to the garage. So every time I'm coming in or out of the garage, I would see these flowers. And this is about how I looked at them. And then one day, I decided to look a little closer, and I took some pictures, and when I downloaded them, lo and behold, I can see all these individual little flowers there in the middle, and they're little ant-like pollinators. I say ant-like because I retained enough from my advanced entomology training to know that there's so many different kinds of insects. I'm not about to say what this is, but they look like little tiny ants, and you really can't see them with the naked eye, 2 feet away. But with the close-up, I could see them, and you can see how these flowers bloom from the outside in. So the ones on the outside are the oldest, and the ones in the middle, the ones that are still green, haven't even bloomed yet. And that's one of the reasons these flowers live so long, because they've got hundreds of little tiny flowers, each of which is going to be blooming until it is pollinated. So there's all the different flowers out there, and they're all vying for attention from many of the same insects. As we know, let's face it, bees are the #1 pollinator. And there are 20,000 kinds of bees. So there's many different kinds, and at least a third of them are specialists that only go to one specific kind of flower. But that means 70% of them are generalists. So they're likely to go to more than one flower. So they're all competing. So how do you think that they lure the pollinators? And you know this information, so let me hear it. Color, scent, and shape. It's not like this. So advertising with color. Most of what they're going to be attracting are flying insects. So color plays into it. And different animals of all kinds, and we're talking specifically about insects, different ones see different ranges of color. So bees, the colors they see best and will attract them to an area initially are blue, yellow, purple, and ultraviolet. And of course, we can't see ultraviolet except with a black light. And looking around this group, some of you remember those days like I do. The rest of you are wondering, what are you talking about? Hummingbirds, you probably know, are attracted to colors in the red spectrum. So red, orange, purple. How many of you have hummingbird feeders? Okay, some of you, not many of you, as it turns out. How many of you have hummingbird feeders that are red and have yellow flowers on them? Looking at this, do you think that's a good idea? Look what yellow attracts aside from hummingbirds. Bees. Do you want bees at your hummingbird feeder? No. Because if they get stuck in your hummingbird feeder, guess who's going to have to let them out? And as we know, when bees feel threatened is when they're likely to sting. So my advice is, don't put yellow flowers on your red hummingbird feeder. Leave them off. And I used to work at a wild bird store, and we sold lots of different kinds of hummingbird feeders, including the ones with the yellow flowers, and we sold the replacement flowers. Well, if the boss wasn't right near me and could hear what I'm saying to a customer, I would say, don't buy them. Your feeder will be fine without them. It'll be better without them. You know, they cost like $3. It wasn't going to be a profit-breaking deal for us. So butterflies see red, orange, yellow, and pink. Flies are attracted to green and white. And I remember as a kid, we always had flies at our picnics because we were eating green and white food. Because invariably, back in those days, and maybe still today, I don't go to picnics much anymore because I have food allergies. But we always had potato salad. We always had green lettuce and stuff. We had things that are going to be attracting. And then there's the carrion eating flies. Y'all know what carrion is, right? Roadkill, dead meat. So they're attracted to maroon and brown flowers. So I was giving this talk to a garden club not far from my house. And one lady says she had seen this beautiful lily on the internet. Of course she had. You know, we've all seen beautiful things on the internet. And many of us have then succumbed to actually buying them, which she did. And her house didn't have a garage, it had a porte cochere. So she planted it right by the door of her car. So she could see it every time she got in and out of her car, sort of like I did with the Gerber daisy. But as soon as it bloomed, she noticed this smell of a dead animal. So she looked all around. And you know what happened when her husband got home? You know what he had to do? He had to look around for a dead animal, and he didn't find one either. And eventually they figured out it was this flower. So aside from its color, it was using its aroma to attract those carrion-eating flowers, pollinators. And so after the blooming season, she transplanted it to the fence line, where she could still see it from the house, but she didn't have to smell it. So here's kind of what bees see versus what humans see. And you can see we don't see the ultraviolet, but we can see orange that bees don't see. So here's two flowers I think everybody's familiar with. We've got the Texas state flower, the bluebonnet on the left, and we have some lantana on the right. Can you guess what these flowers are saying to the pollinators? And assume bees are the pollinators. What do you think, what are they telling the pollinators? Anybody going to venture a guess? Okay, sort of. The bluebonnets are saying, whoops. Bluebonnets bloom from the bottom up, so the oldest flowers are at the bottom of the stem, the newest ones are at the top. And you can see here, here's some wilted flowers. Here's some flowers that have kind of a magenta, purpley center. Up here, the centers are white. Well, pardon? Yeah, they're saying, come to the top. And this is theory. This has not been proven. But it's kind of accepted theory, but not proven. That once the flower has been pollinated, it turns that center to a reddish color, thus turning itself off to not attract the bees. Because a flower never wants a pollinator to be disappointed, because it might not come back again. So it's just, think of it as the opposite of the red light district. In this case, it's saying, stop, don't come to me. Go up here to my sisters that still need you. So we have the same thing going on with the lantana. And you know, there's lots of different kinds of lantana. The native one is yellow and orange. Others are yellow and pink or yellow and white. Some are all yellow, some are purple, some are white, wide variety. But among those that change color, which are generally called the confetti lantanas, they bloom yellow from the center and they turn red when they're pollinated. So here you can see, these are the newer flowers. See this one? It's still yellow in the middle, but it's got one petal that's red. So that one has most recently been pollinated and it's still changing its color. And this has been scientifically proven. And you know, the cluster of flowers on lantana is about the size of a quarter. Wouldn't you have loved to be the grad student that had to sit there and watch these and figure out what was triggering the color change? Like I said, I don't like science. I wouldn't be doing that. So there's other ways pollinators attract flowers attract pollinators, and they're called nectar guides. Over here on the left, we have a foxglove, and you can kind of see where it's got that color thing going, that the ones at the top are whiter and the ones at the bottom are pinker, but it's also got all those dots in it. And it turns out the sex organs of this flower are like up here, kind of on the roof of the flower, way at the base. So it's got to lure pollinators all the way back there to do their thing and transfer some pollen. So that's what these dots are helping to do, is to lead the pollinators way back in there. And here on the right, we have a pansy, another very shy flower. And you know, they grow close to the ground. So when I would want to photograph pansies, I'd go to the nursery where they're on tables. Because even back when I was taking all these pictures, I still didn't want to have to get down on the ground to do it. Now, there's no way I'm getting down on the ground because I'd never get back up. But the sex organs are way buried deep in here in the yellow area. And if, you know, I used to carry a magnifying glass with me that I probably got at the dollar store because I didn't want to carry anything really good with me out in the garden. But now, like most people, I have one of those $700,000-$800,000 magnifying glasses called a smartphone. So we all have a way to magnify things in our pockets now. And you can look down inside that pansy deep in there and you see the sex organs. So these lines are actually little ridges. So when probably a crawling insect, because these are so close to the ground, gets on that flower, it's probably going to fall into one of those grooves. And just think of it as the express lane or the toll road. It's going to lead it right down there to the promised land, down there to the yellow center. Can't get off. Once you get on, you got to go that way. And that's how they provide for their reproduction. So advertising with shapes. You know, bowl-shaped flowers are very common. And most of the composites like these are bowl-shaped, but a lot of other flowers are too, you know, like roses and pansies, wine cups, definitely. Yes, beautiful wine cups. I love them. A lot of them are this bowl-shaped. But if it rains, like it has been lately, it can dilute that pollen and nectar, the two things the pollinators are going for. So some flowers provide built-in protection. Like here on the left, we have fuchsia, which I finally, about 10 or 15 years ago, came to the conclusion to think of these as cut flowers. Because I would buy them every spring. They're so pretty. And of course, they'd only bloom once and then they die. And it's because they're not made for our climate. You go up to the Pacific Northwest and they're everywhere where it's cool and wet. They don't do so well in the hot and dry. But they've got two levels of umbrellas, this one and this one, protecting the sex organs down here. But when I took this picture, I didn't even know about her up here. She's cheating. She drilled a hole in the nectary and she's sipping out the nectar without ever helping the plant at all. That's not nice. But it happens. And over here on the right, we've got daffodils. And you know, they've got the trumpet-shaped bloom and the sex organs are inside that trumpet shape. So they're protected from the wind and the rain. And as hopefully you know from your training, that most native bees are solitary bees. They don't have hives. So they don't have any place to go at night. So they might spend the night inside the trumpet of one of these daffodils. Now, I'm not a morning person. I have lots of friends are, and they say, oh, guess what I saw this morning in my daffodil? And I say, did you take a picture for me? No one's ever taken a picture of an insect inside that trumpet. And I'm not getting up early enough to get out there to see if it really happens, but I know that it does. So landing platforms, you know, we all like easy access. And here we've got these bowl-shaped flower on the left, and on the right we have a butterfly weed, an Asclepia tuberosa, one of our native milkweeds. And I don't know why it looks so yellow in this picture, but it's really orange. And I watched it one day for 45 minutes, and this bee was on that cluster of flowers that whole time. And at the time, I thought it was collecting pollen, but now that I know how milkweeds reproduce, and they have a very complex system, I know that she must have been getting nectar. But she stayed for 45 minutes, so I think milkweed are among the best pollinator plants there are. In addition to being the host of the monarch and queen butterflies, it provides nectar for so many different insects. And in that 45 minutes, I noticed 14 unique kinds of insects. I couldn't name them all, but I could tell you that there was 14 different kinds on that plant at the same time. So I try to always have native milkweed in my gardens. Here we've got a powder puff plant. Doesn't have an easy landing area, looks like a porcupine. And I watched this bee. It took her 5 minutes to get down to the base of the flower. See her there? Took her 5 minutes to get down there. That's a lot of work. So that nectar must have been fantastic. And near my house, there's a Starbucks with a drive-through at a stoplight that it seems like I have to stop at every time I'm on that road. And the line is always around the building at Starbucks. And it always reminds me of this flower. If the reward is good enough, you're willing to put up with a long wait. So advertising with sense, and as being a group of naturalists, I'm talking about native plants, plants in their natural condition, not hybrids. Hybrids, especially in roses, have been created to have aromas that appeal to people, so they'll buy more. And you know, any plant that comes with a trademark or a copyright on the name, that means it's a hybrid. It was man-made and somebody's making money off of that every time you buy one of those. And they usually have to be cloned in order to reproduce, because they're not going to, if they reproduce naturally, they're going to go back to their original state, not stay with how they've been hybridized. So I'm talking about native plants and plants in their nature given state. So advertising with scents, it takes a lot of energy to create a scent. So a plant only does it when they think it's necessary. And a lot of the most fragrant plants are night bloomers because they've lost a lot of the visual attraction, especially on moonless nights. So the flowers are satisfied when they've caused these pollinators to crawl around their sex organs and pick up some pollen in one flower, go to another flower of the same species and spread it on the stigma. So, and the pollinators aren't even aware they're doing this, except when people do it, they know they're doing it, but all the other animals. And lots of times people aren't aware they're doing it. But it's all a lucky accident that these are so codependent on each other, the plants and the pollinators. Neither one can survive without the other. And the things that the pollinators get is nectar, which is sugar water for quick energy. And this is a passion flower, which I think is the poster child for effective pollination. Because look at this, talk about a bee guide. You know, a bee comes in, it's gonna come down here, it's gonna be led right down there by all these. And this is where the nectar is. So she's gonna walk around drinking nectar. These three purple things are the stigmas. So any pollen that's on her back will rub against one of these stigmas while she's drinking. These are the anthers, the 5 yellow and green sub things. And when she flies away, chances are she's going to rub against that and get a bunch of pollen on her back. So when she goes to the next flower, it'll rub off on their stigmas. Passion vines are very interesting plants because they're mostly tropical. There are natives to Texas, but they are the host for a lot of the long-winged butterflies. And so through the millennia, they have learned to create a lot of tricks in order to survive so they don't get eaten by all the caterpillars. And they can even create false eggs on their leaves to make a butterfly think there's already eggs on it, so she won't lay her eggs on it, thinking that the plant would already be eaten by the time her caterpillars hatch. But they're pollinated by passion vine bees. And here you can see one. So hummingbirds we know like nectar, and they used to think up until 20 years or so ago, they thought that nectar was the only thing that hummingbirds ate, you know, and it's sugar water, quick energy. Now they know that about half the diet of hummingbirds is insects, little small insects. So they drink the nectar to get the energy to catch the insects. And at my historical house, we have above ground electrical. So there's the wire running from my house to my garage, then to the pole. And I will see the hummingbirds get nectar from my feeder or my plants, and then go up and sit on that line, that wire, and look up, and I'll see them fly off and presumably catch some insects and then come back and sit. And a lot of times you can see them on top of small trees, and they're probably on the top of big trees, but you can't see them there because they blend in, and hummingbirds are so small. If you got far enough away from the tree to see the top of it, there's no way you'd be able to pick out a hummingbird. But they're up there looking for insects. But I think one of the interesting things about them is, and this of course is Turk's cap. How many of you grow Turk's cap? Yeah, a lot of hands. The perfect plant. It grows in the deep shade into the full sun and blooms no matter what the lighting is. I have ones I have never watered. They were volunteer plants, and I've never watered them, and they come back bigger every year. You know, how easy does it get? The downside is they do spread, and it's hard to dig them up. But hummingbirds are the exclusive pollinator of Turk's cap because they're the only ones who touch the sex organs. And here we've got a male ruby throat. And note, its forehead lines up perfectly here and even looks like he has some pollen on his forehead. And you know, hummingbirds have the long bill, and their tongue is that long again. So they can go way down to the base of the flower where the nectar is. Over here, we've got a bumblebee being rear-ended by a small bee. To them, this was a non-event. The bumblebee did not turn around and use one of her 6 legs to give an ugly gesture. She just went on about her business, drinking her nectar, and the other bee just went on and tried to climb into another flower. And that's what I was trying to get a picture of, was the small bee climbing in or out of a Turk's cap flower, which is very small and it only has room for one at a time. But they always did it faster than I could click, so I missed it. But somehow I got lucky and got this picture. But, you know, bumblebees are native bees, and they're 4 times more productive at pollinating. Well, duh. Look at the size of them. They're 4 times bigger. Look at this. They've got a furry coat that has electrostatically attracts pollen. So, of course, they're more efficient. And they've got a longer proboscis, so they can sit outside the flower and still drink the nectar. The small bees have very short proboscis. It turns out the native bees also can work in worse conditions. They can go out pollinating before dawn and after dark. They can go out on rainy days and in cold weather, where the honeybees especially stay in the hive. Honeybees are divas. You know, you think of Downton Abbey and Lady Mary, couldn't even comb her own hair, couldn't dress herself, couldn't boil water. She had staff. Well, honeybees have staff. It turns out bumblebees have staff too, but they're really just nursemaids that take care of the new brood.
Of
So,
course, another way to feed the hummingbirds is with a feeder designed just for them.
whoops. I don't know what I hit, but obviously I had put a voiceover on this. I don't know what I hit. Yeah, no, wait, here I'm finding it. Oh, that doesn't. No, let's go there. I'm used to a touch screen, obviously.
I used to work at the wild bird store, and one of the things we would say is that having the right
There's some audio connected, that's why, is that what that was?
I get
This bird just moved out of that.
Okay. Sorry about that. That's never popped up before. Whoops. Okay, back to hummingbird feeders. So you want red without yellow, and you want to place it away from other feeders, not because the big birds bother the hummingbirds, it's because the hummingbirds bother the big birds. So they won't come to feeders if the hummingbirds are around. And you need to clean your feeder 3 times a week and replace the nectar. And the recipe is 1/4 cup white sugar, plain white granulated sugar, not any designer sugars, not any artificial, not brown sugar, not molasses, plain white sugar to 1 cup boiling water. And just, you know, stir it up till it's clear. You can store the extra in the fridge. I usually use my 2-cup Pyrex measuring cup that we've probably all got in our kitchens, and 1/2 cup of sugar. And I love this kind of feeder because the perch is right at the angle that hummingbirds normally hover when they're drinking. And if they're hovering when they're drinking, they're using a lot of energy to hover, so they have less net gain of energy. So if they can sit while they're drinking, they get more use of the energy they're drinking. And I also like it because you can see the nectar in it, and you can tell if it's getting cloudy because you didn't remember to change it. And yes, I've had that happen. And also, I have one right outside my kitchen window. I mean, I measured it. I'm 18 inches from it. And when they're drinking, I can see the nectar moving. So it's really cool. Because hummingbirds, you know, are not afraid of people. They're very social. So they don't care if I'm sitting there and go, oh my God, there's a hummingbird. And my cat can be sitting right next to me. And I'll turn her head, see the hummingbird? And she never sees it. But I swear if that cat had to hunt, she wouldn't be alive, which is a good thing. But anyway, so I love this kind. You can buy them, I think they're 2 for $15 on Amazon. So, and you can put the bottom in the dishwasher on the top shelf. I put the top in once and it went in red, it came out pink. So I don't put the top in anymore, but I do have a little cleaner for the feeding ports, and it looks like a little mascara brush, but those little holes can get dirty and you do need to clean them. So pollen is the other thing that the pollinators are looking for. And here we've got a bee with full pollen baskets. You know, bees, like all insects, have 6 legs. They use the first 2 to gather the pollen. The second 2 is what they balance on. And the back legs are where most bees store their pollen. And the hair structure on those legs will be related to the kind of pollen that the bee is going to collect. So if they're a specialist in sticky pollen, they don't need a lot of hairs. And this, I'd say, is a sticky pollen specialist, because we don't see any hairs around this load she has on her legs. But it looks, you know, it's definitely sticking together. Sometimes you can actually see the hair holding the powdery type pollen in there. So some flowers offer pollen only, no nectar. And these are what some of them are. And here on the right is a camellia, you know, and they're not native to here. They're native east of here. They like acid soil. And I was over at the Arboretum one day in the January or February, but it was a nice warm day. You know how we have those. And most of the open camellia flowers had 1 bee on them. And then I looked up and I saw, about from me to where Sarah's sitting, it was like a mini swarm going on over there. So I went over to investigate, and that's where this flower was, and it had just opened. And so the bees were coming to get the pollen. And you can see there's one down here. She's the one that's inside. Only one fits in at a time at this stage. This one has big pollen baskets. She's already gotten her load and she's flying away. This one's going to be the next one in. And flying around was a lot more bees, and on all the stems near them on this plant and on the next shrub, there was more bees waiting to get in there. So they knew that this flower had just opened and had fresh pollen, enough for everybody. So another interesting plant is Datura, and it's a Texas native. It's also known as Jimson weed, angel trumpet, devil's trumpet, moonflower. It's got a whole lot of common names, but it's a night bloomer. How many of you grow this or are familiar with it? Yeah, several of you. You know, you can actually see the petals move when the flower opens. So I was over at a neighbor's house taking pictures one evening, and I was packing up to go, and he said, oh, had I ever seen one of these open? I said, no. He says, well, stay and watch. It's interesting. So that's what I was doing, and a bee kept coming by to see if she could get in, and she couldn't get in yet. So here's when she finally got in. The flower was open enough. And as a photographer, I was so disappointed to see white pollen and a white flower. I would have much rather had a contrasting color, but you know, you get what nature gives you. But this, just to me, it looks like cotton candy on a stick, doesn't it? So she's the first one in there. Here's a few minutes later, and look at those pollen baskets. They are getting the job done. And here it is, all gone. And I didn't know if 1 minute had passed or an hour. I was just mesmerized by it all. And when I downloaded it, it was 10 minutes. So those those bees stayed up late to come and get this pollen. They knew that flower was going to open and they'd have what they were looking for. So I was very impressed with that. Then a few years later, I was over at the project that I coordinate at White Rock Lake at the bathhouse, where we have a pollinator garden. And it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I noticed the bees buzzing around the datura. And of course, the flowers weren't open because they open at dusk. And they were prying open the petals of the flower. And the first one I saw, kind of, you know, she crawled in a little bit and then she backed out and flew away. And I thought, wonder what that was about. And then I kind of stepped back and where I could see the whole flower, because the bloom is about this long. These are big flowers. And down at the bottom, I could see a black blob. So I knew there was already one in there. And there was only space for one. So she knew that since that girl got there first, you know, she had to go somewhere else. But then I began thinking, you know, I'd been so impressed with those other bees, but I decided those were really probably your C student bees. These are your AP bees. They're already going to have that college degree when they finish high school because they're out working hard, prying those petals apart to get the pollen before bedtime. So pretty smart. So how can we help the pollinators? Number one, avoid spraying pesticides. And I'm speaking to the choir here, but when I'm speaking to a gardening group, you know, and somebody says, well, Mosquito Joe doesn't kill bees, does he? He just kills mosquitoes. Well, yeah, maybe, maybe not. Replace some of your lawn and exotic plants, that is non-natives, with clusters of native and old variety plants that will have something for pollinators. Plant more flowering plants. In my mid-century neighborhood, I live on a very long block. I mean, my address is 878. So, you know, it's a long block. There's probably not more than 3 other houses on my block that have any blooming flowers in the front yard. Now, I don't know what they have in the back because they all have stockade fences. But, you know, in so many neighborhoods, you don't see any blooming flowers. So I always encourage people to plant old variety or native plants to provide food for the pollinators. I was really surprised. Our Master Naturalist chapter does Native Plants and Prairies Day every the first Saturday of May at the bathhouse where I have the pollinator garden. And it's actually co-sponsored by the Native Plant Society, the Native Prairies Association, and the Master Naturalist. But so many people came into that garden and said, my God, I've never seen so many bees. And I was really surprised because that draws people that are already interested in nature. It's not drawing garden clubs, despite my effort to advertise it to them. But people were astounded at how many bees they saw and how many bumblebees. And I said, well, if you have the right flowers, you know, if you build it, they will come. So plant more flowering plants. and tell others what's really happening in their garden. Tell them about the orgy. You know, if you have lawn, is there anybody here that has replaced their lawn with plants? Yay. I had to walk a block and a half before I found a lawn that had henbit growing in it. Because everybody uses weed and feed or chem lawn and all that kind of stuff to kill everything but their vaunted Bermuda or St. Augustine. But henbit is a great pollinator plant. It's a cool weather grower. It's going to die anyway. You don't need to kill it. But it provides food for pollinators. Dandelions, brought to this continent by the settlers that came and established Jamestown in 1607. They brought their beehives and they brought their dandelions. It's only in the US where dandelions are considered that four-letter word called weed. In Europe, where they're native, they're a treasured plant because they offer food for pollinators and for humans in the cooler season. So, show your family and friends how to become voyeurs. There's lots of flowers out there. There should be lots of bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, all of them living in a symbiotic relationship where they help each other survive and reproduce.